Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Haley Spierbauer.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. Today is a very special episode. I'm excited to introduce you to, you may already know this person, but I'm excited to introduce on today's episode, Adam Ezring, the Deputy Director at the Collaborative for Student Success. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Haley, how you doing?
You know, I'm pretty great. As we said, it's Friday Eve. It's been a good week here for me. How are you?
I'm doing better now because you just called this a very special episode, and I don't know what makes me special, but now I'm feeling even more special. So, wow, well, I'm just excited.
Listen, I love getting to meet brilliant people doing work on behalf of students, and I say that you and your team fall squarely in that department. So I'm super excited for you to tell folks about the work you do at the Collaborative and for you to share even about your own story. Should we jump right in?
We should jump right in. I appreciate being called brilliant. The team is brilliant. I'm a part of the team, but let's
love that. And let's
be truthful.
Probably add humble too then, right? We should add that as a brilliant and humble. There we go. So Adam, I always ask my guests to start off with a little bit of a introspective question, which is, how did you come to be the professional and personal version of yourself?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question and start with it. It's funny the things you remember from your childhood, but I have this very specific memory of my parents telling me that years earlier, a sort of like pencil pushing administrator had told them that even though I didn't have a documented learning disability, I was what they called a slow, unengaged learner, and that I would likely never graduate from high school. So God only knows how a administrator makes that determination of like a little kid in kindergarten or first grade or whatever. But thankfully for me, I had parents who were like, yeah, no, we'll just see about that there. They just didn't accept that. They just wouldn't, allow me to be put in this box by this administrator. And they made education a priority for me. And, fortunately for me, they were able to help me out. They were able to, work with me. They were able to get me after school tutoring. Inevitably, when we moved to a better school district because they wanted me and my older sister to have better opportunities. So I'm the product of public schooling, but I'm the product of engaged family supporting that public schooling. And I am lucky and fortunate as a result of it. So the kid who was once told would never graduate from high school sits before you today with a master's degree in public policy. And I recognize wholeheartedly the value and strength of education because of that.
Often when I ask this question, the follow-up is like, what moments stand out to you as transformative as a learner? And my goodness, did you just answer that in your very first statement? That is,
yeah.
I wonder how many parents, maybe hopefully not as much today as a while back, but when I don't want to make excuses for anyone because that is a pretty unacceptable thing to say to a parent, especially when you're talking about a learner at the start of their career, like, woo. But, that is transformative in a negative way for so many.
Like I said, I'm fortunate that I had parents who didn't accept that. And I am fortunate that I had opportunities presented to me in all of the years that followed, with strong, educators and strong public school opportunities to overcome those challenges, right? But I think you're right that so many people don't, and so many young people get thwarted because of it, held back because of it. I think a lot of parents and students become uninspired because of it and give up as opposed to overcome the struggles. And we need to do a better job in the education field at making sure that that's not the case, that we are helping students overcome these challenges.
Yeah, I'm just like sitting with this for a second. I think you're absolutely right. It's so hard. It's so hard. I was a teacher, and I think about the times that people tell stories like celebrities and writers and accomplished politicians, and they tell similar stories like so-and-so said this, this administrator said I'd never amount to anything, like, look at me now. And what a backward way to try and inspire a kid to achieve. I mean, it's clearly the opposite of what all brain science tells us will be effective. And the system in some ways, obviously disproportionately is built and impacts different kinds of communities. And it's just such I feel like, whew, that's so heavy, Adam. It's so heavy.
It's one of the reasons why it stuck with me all these years. I mean, I don't remember the incident. I don't think I was even in the room. I remember my parents telling me about the incident and that motivated them, but they also used it as a way to tell me what I had overcome. They weren't trying to use it as a motivator for me as a, kindergartner or first grader. They were like, oh, you're never going to graduate from high school. No, it was years later that they sat down with me and they told me about how far I've come. And I'm glad that they shared that story.
I imagine that story has obviously driven you personally and professionally, but it also really has driven what the reason for your involvement in an organization like the Collaborative. So why don't you tell a little bit for our listeners, what is the mission, the work that you're doing at the Collaborative for Student Success? And maybe how does that tie back to your initial inspiration that you just shared?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question that way. The mission and focus of the Collaborative is multifaceted. As a fun fact about me, I look for inspiration in movies. I'm sort of a child of the silver screen. And I particularly love movies where people overcome challenges and obstacles. It's like, the Goonies finding the treasure to save their home. It's like, I love that kind of thing. And I look for the same sort of inspiration in education. I want to see bold, dramatic education initiatives. I want people to not accept the status quo and to overcome it. And that's one of the missions of the Collaborative for Student Success. Our job in the education space and field is to change the national narrative around major education reform efforts and initiatives, to spotlight great work that's going on in education, to raise awareness of the things that are working, to build support for the things that are working, to encourage scaling, replication, and emulation of the things that are working. And we do that across a variety of fronts. We're focused on high quality curricular materials. We're focused on the use of data through state assessments. We're focused on how states are using this influx of federal relief funds to accelerate learning in the wake of the pandemic. And I'll happily talk more about each of those, but let me pause there because that's the big picture mission and vision of the Collaborative.
Our brains are wired. I talked about brain science already once today, so we can tell what kind of episode this is going to be. But our brains are wired to receive feedback, either positive or negative, in the same way. The same things light up in your brain when you receive feedback. But what I love is, as humans, we can be easily motivated by positive, by looking at what's good around us and striving for that. So obviously, it sounds like the spotlight work that you're doing and the attention you're giving to some of these really profound, effective implementations and thinking and structures has been very impactful. What would you say that hard to describe where we are in the endemic. I know recently the CDC just announced that we're not having a pandemic anymore, but where we are today in May of 2023, how would you describe the bright spots on this side of the pandemic?
It's a great question. So during the pandemic, we wanted to try and find those bright spots and those spotlights. So we launched an effort in a new website called edurecoveryhub.org. The goal of that effort was to look through all of these statewide efforts and spending and pull out those great examples, those spotlights that were worthy of highlighting, that we wanted to see scaled or replicated or emulated. So we partnered with the Edunomics Lab at Georgetown University and the Center on Reinventing Public Education to dive into state efforts around the country and see what we could find. As a result of that website now houses just about 70 promising practices across 30 states around the country. And there's some really great work going on around the country with the use of those funds. And in places like Ohio, where they're working with universities to provide tutoring to school districts. In places like Arizona, where they modernized their whole transportation system to make sure that they were getting students to school and so that they had Wi-Fi accessible buses and the like. In places like Baltimore, where they hired paraprofessional support so that teachers could spend more time in small group instruction and developing individualized learning plans for students. So there's a lot of great work going on around the country with the impact of the pandemic and the pandemic funding that came into education. It's we like to call them promising practices because we don't know yet, what of those are going to be the most effective and have the most impact. And that's part of the next step of what we have to do now that we are post-pandemic, as you say.
Yeah, I think, of course, we can see, I love the term promising. We could see how immediate impact is generated and what outcomes we're seeing. But there's also this longitudinal approach we have to think about as well. What has sticking power? What's able to be replicated? I know that you touched on the comment about the looming fiscal cliff, or like where people are spending their money. What will persist beyond the current dollars that are being allocated to schools? Yeah. I think that's a big question for a lot of people right now. Is we did all these great things. We had all this available funding. What happens when it dries up? How are you thinking about that particular challenge that schools are facing right now?
Yeah, this is the challenge. You're 100% right. And we're not quite there yet, right? Because states have until the end of next year to pay down all of their funds. But we're not waiting on that deadline, right? We need to know now what's working so that we can know when the funding dries up, what needs to be sustained long term. And that's part of our shift in transition and the new work of the Edu Recovery Hub. We're sort of done trying to find the promising practices. Now we want to know what's working. So we've actually very recently launched a whole effort to try and ascertain that. We have sent a letter to every state and every district that we've spotlighted on the Edu Recovery Hub. And we've asked them to tell us what data they have about reach and impact. We know how they've spent the money. We don't really know what students have been reached, like demographically, what students have been reached, what parents have been reached, what educators have been reached. How has the community benefited from these investments? We need to look at data. We need to look at student assessment data to make some determinations about what is working. Now, in all fairness, right? It's a little early. Some of these programs, we don't know yet whether or not they're successful. We don't have 3 years worth of trend data. They've gone into effect over the last 3 years, but we have preliminary data that we need to be collecting, that we need to be looking at, and that we need to be analyzing. In Connecticut, for example, they actually used their federal COVID relief funds to create a research collaborative with their higher education university system to regularly evaluate some of the major efforts that they were investing in with their pandemic funds. Every state should be doing something similar, and every state, every district should be collecting that reach and impact data on these investments so that they can make educated decisions about what needs to be sustained. We want to help do that, and we want to help spotlight where we have the data, what is working.
I've seen such a positive trend, especially in my space and ed tech, towards impact data. I wouldn't say that we're holistically there, but the ESSER funds necessitated some demonstration of impact. The media seems to have grabbed onto that quite a bit. There have been a couple loud voices in the room that have talked about it, and I appreciate how much of an emphasis the collaborative is playing in that particular arena, because it is a very difficult job to be an administrator. And over the past 3 years, it has been an exceedingly difficult job to be a teacher, an administrator, a superintendent, whatever level. Yeah. And yet we have to be really smart about what investments, both from a resource, meaning financial, and time perspective, that we're putting in our schools. There was that Learn Platform research study that said teachers were using 1,729 ed tech tools during the pandemic. That's a huge number, Adam.
Yeah.
Right? Like of course, that's too big. Like I couldn't even remember my 2 passwords to get into anything I need to get into on a daily basis, not 1,700. But it's not about breadth. It's about depth.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that for too often in education, the vision of ed tech has always been, what's the new thing we can buy? What's the new thing we can deliver to a school district? And less about how to use it effectively in your classroom. And you're right. Like, no, I think teachers have had it harder than any other profession in the world over the last couple of years. And clearly school administrators haven't had it easy either, because they're trying to make sense of all this chaos. The only thing that I can say is to just, like, +1 to everything you said, that, like, when it comes to technology funding, when it comes to investments in ed tech, we've got to look at what's working. We've got to look at the data. We've got to make the case for that ed tech and for those investments on the basis of data, on the basis of what's working, on the basis of what teachers say is making a difference in their students' lives every day.
How has the collaborative decided, like, how did the decision come to be, or why do you think the prioritization of HQIM, high quality instructional materials and assessments, are leading a lot of the work? Like, let's talk for folks that are just trying to understand that decision, because there's a couple of routes you could have gone, but those are important ones. So let's dive into why those are leading the work.
I really appreciate you asking that question, because you're spot on, and that the collaborative has made high quality instructional materials and state assessment data and the use of data critical priorities for our organization, and because we believe they're critical priorities for the entire education field. Groups like EdReports and RAND will tell you on the curriculum front that upwards of 70% of teachers struggle on a daily basis to find high quality instructional materials that motivate their students, that help them reach their students. Teachers shouldn't be wasting their time, spending their time looking for this. They should have it. We should be providing it to them. We should be providing them the aligned professional learning to help them make the most of those materials in their classroom. We set out to help with that. We created a website called Curriculum HQ, and it has resources, and it helps educators, parents, community members just learn about the existence of high quality materials that are highly rated and that are making a difference in reaching students and teachers and their students. There are high quality supports like Zearn and Dreambox that are helping thousands of students right now understand and engage better with mathematics in particular, which is such a struggle for young kids. We know that these materials are good. We know that these materials are strong. They're not being used everywhere, right? And they're few and far between. They're too few of these great materials that work, right? So we need to make people aware of the strength of things like Zearn and Dreambox, and we need to encourage access to and the use of the materials that are making a difference.
When Sold a Story came out, every one of my mom friends was like, Haley, did you know about this? Did you know that I'm like, yes, of course I knew about this. Also, they're like, well, how do I know about my school? I go, well, there's this thing called EdReports. And let me tell you, there was a little bit of a hullabaloo amongst my network of mom friends who were at schools where their materials that their students were using were not high quality. It goes hand in hand with that statement about 1,700 ed tech tools. Technically, a lot of digital curriculums are considered ed tech, right? There are so many, schools are inundated with the choices of what to use. I appreciate the emphasis on, here, let us just compile it and make it easier for you. I had a call with a mom friend this morning whose son is not reading. It's the end of kindergarten. She's like, what do I do this summer? This is one of my best friends from college. And she said to me, where do I look to figure out what to do? I was like, well, there's no one place to look. But, how hard is that as a parent to have this desire to, better your kid's education and not even know where to go?
I mean, I think this is part of the challenge writ large in education. We don't make it easy to find the good stuff. We don't make it easy to find out what you're even currently using to know if it's good or if it could be better. There are some states that have lists, like lists of the materials that their districts can use, and they tier them by quality, right? And they because there's a lot of, conversation in education policy about local control and whatnot. We don't dictate curriculum at a higher up level down, right? But we can tell people what's good and what's better, right? We can highlight for parents and families and community members whether or not their district, their school is using the best of what's out there to be used right now. Very few states actually have those sort of statewide approved lists of curriculum. And part of our job with Curriculum HQ is to help raise awareness of the existence of better materials, but also the existence of where those materials are being used and or not being used, right? To create advocacy, for and in support of better materials.
I think that advocacy point is a really interesting one. I just had an episode go live with some folks I think Tafshir Cosby, Evan Stone, Mohan from Our Turn. And we talked a lot about advocacy and the work that is required of various stakeholders to be a part of improvement for their kids. And I don't think it's a shame. I think it's great. Advocacy means involvement. It means having a knowledgeable stakeholder population. And it also means being current with information. So I really do appreciate, the work that's happening by Collaborative to afford various stakeholders the information so they can make a decision about how their involvement looks and sounds and feels.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, Tafshir and Mohan are dear friends. I'm honored to be amongst their ranks and as a guest on your podcast. Evan is like a legend in the education field, so I appreciate that. On Tafshir in particular, she's a parent advocate and is part of a national organization, the National Parent Union. We actually partnered with the National Parent Union to create a sort of top 10 list of the practices and investments that we had surfaced via the Education Recovery Hub that were specific to the needs and interests of parents. Like what are the types of practices that parents most want to see, could most benefit from, cared the most about. We created this, sort of top 10 advocacy tool so that the National Parent Union's EPIC campaign had this resource to carry with them into advocacy meetings so that they could go to policymakers and say, hey, are we doing these things in our state? And if we're not doing these things in our state, why aren't we? Right? Here's the list. Here's the list of promising practices. We should be following suit here in, insert your state here.
Right. Yeah. I love that. That's exactly how I imagine partnership in this space to work. We all have different strengths. We all have different foci. I love that the National Parents Union had your resources and information at their fingertips when they were equipping parents with the knowledge and information to speak on behalf of their kids, their deserving kids at their school meetings and with their school leadership. That's so important. That's what I come across so often though, right? In my network, highly intelligent, highly educated, and it doesn't have to be that. Every parent cares. You shouldn't have to be an educator, highly educated. No, that is exactly the problem. We need better tools to equip parents of all different backgrounds to support the people they love, their children, their students.
Totally agree. And I'm really proud of the partnership that we did with the National Parent Union. It was exactly, the goal of the partnership to create a resource to help parents advocate on behalf of their students. By the way, we also created a similar list with TNTP, the New Teacher Project, formerly known as the New Teacher Project, to create a list and resources, a list of promising practices based on the priorities of that organization. And heck, I'll put this out to all of your listeners. We'd create a list for any of them, so that they could know what the promising practices priorities are that they might care about. Because we've got it. It's all there in one place. By the way, I do have to jump in here and say that in addition to providing parents specific examples of what to advocate for, this is where data is also super important and critical. And I mentioned edurecoveryhub.org and I mentioned curriculumhq.org, and I'd be totally remiss if I didn't mention Assessment HQ, which is another website that we run that is committed to transparently and publicly reporting on every state's state assessment results, right? Because too often this data is buried on state education agency websites and it's not understood by the general public. But state assessment data is so critical to seeing where we are as a nation, but seeing where we are in individual states about how students are performing. And we want that data to be widely seen and understood. Sadly, that data is underutilized. I just have to say, we do a not great job at using state assessment data to make sure that we are driving resource allocation decisions on behalf of the schools and students that need them the most. But Assessment HQ is designed to help correct that problem, with first making sure that we are being super transparent and publicly reporting this data.
Oh, I love that. I love transparency. I think that over the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of light shown on problems that always existed that now a lot more people have attention on. And so the more of their attention on, the more that we can discuss that and acknowledge that and use that information to make decisions on behalf of deserving students, the better off we are. Adam, I usually ask my last guest about what advice they would give a teacher starting their career. I have the same question for you. Teachers, starting their career today, it's a very different landscape than it was even 4 years ago. So what would you tell them?
My advice for teachers, and it's not just teachers starting their career, I think it's all teachers, is to get out there and make your voice heard. I think teachers are and can be and should be central to education advocacy efforts because teachers really are experts. They're experts about their students. They're experts about their needs. And teachers have a voice, and that voice can live and exist beyond the confines of their classroom. And it should. Teachers should be advocating for the use of data before their school administrators, before their school boards. Teachers should be pushing for those high quality instructional materials in their classroom and the aligned professional learning that must accompany it in order for it to be successful. Teachers know the types of investments with these federal COVID relief dollars that are making a difference and an impact in their schools and in their classrooms. They need to be out there saying that and asking for more of it and asking for those problems to be sustained. The collaborative is deeply involved in wanting to help and encourage teacher advocacy. We're actually doing a strategic communications training for science teachers around the country in July. After that, we are presenting at the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, talking about how they can play a role in creating those state lists of high quality curriculum and whatnot. And we're launching a whole new effort to try and find more math teacher champions in particular. We've previously worked with groups like the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics to create cohorts of math advocates from the sort of teacher pool. We're going to be doing more of that because we need more math champions right now around the country talking about what it is that educators need in order to be super successful in their classroom. And we owe it to those teachers to help them find that voice and to spread that voice widely.
That is a perfect end to our conversation, Adam. I will just reiterate how grateful I am that you were today's guest and sharing this important work that you and the team are doing over at the Collaborative for Student Success. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the Learning Can't Wait podcast today.
Haley, thank you. And I'm honored to be on your podcast. And as we've already discussed, I do want to also plug the Route K-12 podcast that the Collaborative for Student Success runs. That's on our edurecoveryhub.org site. That sadly took me too long to get out there. But no, I love the fact that we've had this conversation. I love the dialogue. And I'm so excited that we're going to be able to work together and spread the word.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say in this space, I am so grateful to be in your orbit, being around people that are working on behalf of kids, deserving kids all over the US and hopefully one day the world. It's just an incredible place to be. So thank you so much again, Adam.
Thank you, Haley. Really appreciated it. Great conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, agreed. And thanks to everybody for tuning in today.
Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.